Everyone. We are back.
Yeah.
I'm Lane. I got my boy Zane here. What's up, man? How you doing?
What's up, man? I'm good. I'm good. I'm ready to get into this one.
Man, well, this is a big one today, and
Yeah.
I know it's very personal to me. I know it's
Yeah.
personal to you.
Yeah. Man.
Man, we're gonna get right into it, but there's a lot of people who are gonna watch this and maybe feel a little offended, and you were part of this group, and it may kind of touch some feelings, but that's what we intended to do, to hurt your feelings today. And we intend to come right at you, let you know from our perspective how we feel, and what we're involved in, and everything that went down and happened. Zane, you want to give them a little information about the organization or group, what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, just I guess just to kind of just jump on what you just said as well. We also want to do this to help people that are basically coming out of religious churches,
Yep.
cults and organizations, those that have been hurt, So this particular podcast is something that my boy and I, have like basically shared trauma,
Yeah.
in. And so like I always do, I do bring a little information. So I did get some more paperwork,
Break out the paperwork.
I think that's important. So I do have some research. One of them, this is for fair use, educational purposes only. All right. So I got some information from what is this? This is Psychology Today, another place, WVUR, and
Man.
Pew Research Center. All right. So I do research in general. So I just want to make sure you guys know that about 40 million Americans have left churches and other religious institutions in the last 25 years. And for some, the decision is rooted in deep pain. Now, that's what we're going to talk about today. This may turn into probably 2 or 3 series or episodes
Yeah. Yeah.
by the time we get done with this, but that's one piece of information I want to give you. The other is around the world, many people are leaving their childhood religion.
Mm.
It says surveys in 36 countries find that Christianity and Buddhism have the biggest losses from religious switching. So people
Wow.
are also switching religions for various reasons. We're just going to speak about our specific scenario. And then last, I wanted to bring up some information, and this is regarding cults. Now, I got to be honest, Lane. I started feeling like I haven't felt these feelings in a long time, but
I was feeling the same thing, and I was kind of anxious
yeah,
when I was getting off of work this morning. I was
yeah,
just like, man, I can't wait to get into this and
yeah.
man,
So
say how I feel.
yeah, so this, there might be a range of emotions, that come
Yeah.
up through this. And I know this is going to be part of not only our healing, you know what I'm saying, in our journey, but hopefully this can help, some others out there that's either going through it or just even know what to look for. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? If you are getting caught up in religion or you getting caught up in a religious organization, or in our case, it was extreme, it
Mm.
was a cult. And
Yeah.
so one of the things this article says no one joins a cult. It says they are recruited by systematic social influence process. Destructive individuals and cults use deception and undue influence to make people dependent and obedient. It does say not all influence is bad. There is difference between due and undue influence. And cult leaders are typically malignant narcissists and
Mm.
want people who will be obedient to them.
Wow.
So before we kick
Wow.
this off and get into this, I do want to just make a disclaimer. Like, everybody that's in churches and religious groups are not bad people. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? But we talking about the people that's leading these groups, that's starting these groups, or that come out of these groups and think that they need to go start another group.
Ooh.
So
Ooh,
if
we're
you're a
gonna talk about
pastor,
that too.
so if you're a pastor, a bishop, a rabbi, and you're truly doing God's work, all encouragement to you. May God bless
Mm.
your work. But we're talking to the narcissist. We're talking to the
Yeah.
people that are starting these organizations that need to go sit down somewhere and get your own healing, because
Yeah.
hurt people hurt people. I'll let you take it away, Lane.
Well, let me ask you a question. Because I remember when we got into this organization, we
Yeah.
had just left high school.
Yep.
And I noticed when I think it was like a little winter break we had or something, or I noticed your behavior was different.
Yeah.
And that's when you broke it down to me what you were doing and what religious group you were a part of.
Yeah.
And what made you join this group?
Initially it was kind of the camaraderie, it was
Mm,
the friendly kind of introduction to, I was on a campus, right, in New
mm,
Orleans, and we're all new on the sense, as a freshman, I'm coming into this, this new college, university, and it's just natural. You're trying to make friends and
right.
fit in different areas. And so this is one of the first few people that, kind of started to approach. And, at the time I didn't realize it, right? I'm 18 years old, so it was more of like a kind of introduction of like, hey, you want to do a Bible study? And that kind of just led to the next step, the next Bible study. And
Mm,
initially that part is really all good. The initial part of just, getting into the scriptures and just kind of
mm,
reading and sharing, about the Bible, that part was fine.
right.
But, looking back on it, there was an agenda, because the way the studies of the scripture were
Mm,
very programmatic, right?
right.
They were set to influence your thinking, not
Right.
just about like what the word actually says, but giving you more of kind of introduction into how the organization, uses that religion in a very different way. So let's
Mm,
put it that way.
wow, man.
Yeah.
I
That's
know I
how it
had the
started for me.
same curiosity about the organization coming from a Buddhist background.
Mm,
My whole family, my mom, my grandmother, everybody on my grandmother's side was a Buddhist. And so I
yeah.
didn't really have any knowledge about that much about church or the Bible or anything. So when this was presented to me, I had just like, oh man, I get to learn about Jesus, the
Yeah.
Bible, and church and everything. And I remember doing those studies and I was like, man, why do I got to do this series in order
Right.
and do these specific things that they were challenging me and telling me I had to do in order to join? And a
Right.
lot of it was uncomfortable. And they broke it down to saying like, you have to sacrifice everything. I remember one guy saying you would need to even sacrifice your son. And he wasn't saying that for me to do something like that, but he was trying to
Right.
get in my mindset to let me know that, hey, this is serious, that if it came to that, you would have to prove your love for God by doing something like that.
Mhm.
And so I was going along with it and just doing the studies. And off the bat, man, it just became very controlling.
Yeah.
And I remember like from Sunday through like Saturday, we had a typical week. And I remember, you had your church service on Sunday, which you gone all day because you're at the 10 a.m. service and
Yeah.
then you're doing Bible studies afterwards and you're
Yep.
what they call fellowshipping with all the members afterwards. And then
Yep.
on Tuesday was a midweek service. And this is kind of where the church business was done, where they would collect your tithes and a lot of updates for the church would go on, but that tithing was somewhat, it wasn't really uncomfortable because that is a scripture. It's in the Bible. It references about tithing. And
Right.
I had
Right.
no problem with that, but it was how determined they were to know like your income. Like
Yeah.
they wanted to know every dollar, every cent you made to make sure you're giving a tenth. They couldn't just have faith in you, knowing that you're going to give what you can give, but it was like they wanted to know how much you made an hour, what was your gross or your net pay and your paycheck.
Yeah.
Regardless of what responsibilities you had with your family or with your kids, they wanted to
Yep.
make sure they got their money's worth.
Yep. Yep. And that was the man, I still got feelings about that
Yeah,
I'm
I
working
know.
through. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
a lot of people are still as they're coming out, of not just our organization, but other religious organizations, are seeing that the manipulation of men, you know what I
mm,
mean, to take advantage of a scripture that talks about tithe. In a lot of cases are taking it out of context just for their own gain, and I think that's one of the most disappointing pieces of that is just seeing really the abuse that takes place. There's a lot of people that are suffering financially, but they're trying to get their tithe because they're being hounded, like
yeah,
you say, and micromanaged for something that is should just be between them and God.
yeah, yeah.
It's really none of their business. on
Right,
what
right,
you're given.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's sickening to really look back. And that was one of my exits. I know we'll talk about exits probably in another
Hmm.
episode, but my wife and I had sat down with one of the elders in a big house, and
Mm.
because I started seeing things for myself that was not
Right,
making sense, and
right.
we started bringing to their attention like this whole tithe process is not biblical
Yeah,
on how you're going about it, how you're managing and trying to manipulate people to give a certain amount and trying to know what their gross is. And
yeah.
this man literally said, "You're right, but that's not something we could just this is a big boat. We just can't turn this ship around that quick." And I
Mm.
knew at that point it was just time for me to leave. I'm like,
The rap.
what do you mean? Like
Right, right.
you're so worried about the ship, but the ship is already falling apart like the
Yes.
Titanic. Like
It's
this ain't
about to
about
sink.
God. You know what I mean? At this point, this
Street
ain't about
iceberg.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just one of the reasons, that helped us see the difference between the
Mhm.
scripture and what man was trying to do with it.
Man, I remember speaking about those midweek services and the tithing. They encouraged you to live a poor lifestyle. It was always, they were always talking about, you shouldn't have a fancy or a nice car, and your car should be used to take members to church. I don't know if you remember that, when people calling
Do
you
I?
up, can I get a ride? Can I get a ride? Which is, it's okay. Not everybody has a car, but
Right.
the focal point of you having a car should be to take members to church. A lot of families had minivans and trucks
Right.
to take members to church.
Right.
And that stood out for me from jump, is how they wanted everybody to live poor. And I was just like, wow. And then you were talking about the tithing. I don't know if you remember the special contribution.
Do I?
Man, and I remember one
Yep.
instance that raised the eyebrow with me real quick, where I had just got in and I was trying to do the special contribution and everything and raise the money for my tithe. I think they came up with a figure where you're supposed to give 17 times the amount of your weekly tithe, something like that.
Right.
And I'm a college kid, mind you, and I'm also a single parent at that time. I had a son.
Right.
And it was around my birthday time, and my grandmother bought me some shoes, and they were questioning that. Was like, how you gonna not make your tithe, but you got some new shoes? I'm like, man, that's none of
Right.
your business. Like, my grandmother bought this for me for a birthday gift.
Right.
Like, you expect me to go sell them for the tithe? And off
Right.
the bat, I had some issues and problems, and I followed it in the back of my head, where I was like, okay, I'm gonna come back to this. But that's one thing that I'm looking at, is how they really were forcing people to live poor, and people like their clothes and everything. And like you said, the recruiting process, their main recruit, they were on those college campuses.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that was their big recruitment zone, was college kids. You remember that?
Yeah. Do I? Yeah. I probably needed to make a public announcement for that, for all the parents out there, and maybe your kids
Mm,
are getting ready to go to college.
yeah,
I know you're thinking you need to just look out for like, sororities and
yeah.
fraternities and credit card schemes that may be
Mm,
out there where they trying to get your kids to sign up for credit cards.
yeah,
You need to watch out for these religious organizations too.
man.
Like, it's a lot to get caught up, in on a
Hmm.
college campus. We know the obvious things, right? There's drugs, there's sex, there's, alcohol, there's
Yeah,
parties, there's all that. But nobody talks about this.
yeah,
Nobody talks about like how people get recruited into these radical, we talk about other religions, right? But there's some radical cults in all religions, and
yeah.
Christianity got theirs too.
Oh,
So we just want to make sure that gets put out there,
yeah, yeah.
protect your children, make sure you're having conversations with them. For me, when I look back, I was already in a hurt place. We already
Mm,
talked about, mental health and
yeah,
trauma and stuff like that in our previous episodes. But man, when you're 18 years old and you're trying to figure out life and, don't have my mom, I got issues with my father. I'm just trying to just figure out life at that age. And I leave my hometown of LA to do it. Now I'm in, New Orleans, which I have family in New Orleans, but I wasn't really close to them. I just
right.
was just trying to get out, right? And figure things out. So now I'm just opening myself up. in a sense. I'm vulnerable.
Mm.
And I say that because, when you're 18, you're vulnerable,
Yeah. Yeah.
and not, to a lot of things. So just keep an eye, try to keep that communication open with your kids, especially at these college campuses, because there's more than just the obvious things that's going on. There's some things that can impact your life for a long time,
Yeah.
with these religious groups too.
One of the ways that this church used to control people, they not to use the word force, but they really recommended and really pushed you to live in a household. These so-called like Christian households. Some of the they were all members of the church.
Yeah.
And sometimes, if they live in like a 3-bedroom apartment, it'd be like, or a 2-bedroom apartment, it'd be like 2 or 3 people in one room.
Yeah.
Man, that felt uncomfortable with me from jump. And I couldn't
Yeah.
figure out why. But I had a son, and it's like, man, I'm not really comfortable with taking my son, who's still a baby, and moving around guys who I don't know.
All right.
And it just felt uncomfortable. And I didn't speak about it because, they were really, if you spoke out anything against the church, they were really like against that. And,
Yeah.
but in my feelings, I was just like, man, I cannot do that. Some of these guys just rub me the wrong way. And those households they use to really manipulate and control you. So if you were one of those households, guess what? You're going to the Tuesday midweek service automatically. You're
Yeah. Yeah.
going to Sunday. You're not going to miss. You're going to Bible talk. You're going to do Bible studies through the week because that's what those households they put together were for to keep you controlled and involved in the church through the week. I mean, you had a little bit of classwork if you were in school or your regular job. After that, man, it was church business all through the week.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was a typical week, and the households, as you mentioned, was definitely part of the programming. In its purest form, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could it be a good idea for a couple, dudes to get a place together just to kind of
Yeah,
protect themselves from like the outside, to try to stay
yeah,
focused. Yeah, I mean, but these were a lot different.
yeah.
Like you said, they were piling up. I was in one,
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 people, in one apartment, and some were sharing rooms and different things like that. But it's like you said, it kind of led into more programming. Like you're kind
Mm-hmm.
of more bought into the programming the more you get involved. And
Right,
so
right.
for me, I was in a situation where, moving back from New Orleans to LA because of, financial needs, to try and
Mm-hmm.
get back on track. Now I'm in this church organization cult and I need a place to stay. So it's like, hey, yeah, we'll get you set up in a household, right? So again, taking kind of advantage of where I was at that time, it seemed like a great idea, right?
Right, right.
But again, it is very kind of manipulative on using a person's vulnerability to get you more kind of bought into the certain programs that they had in
Yeah,
place.
yeah, yeah. They use words. They used to often talk about the word pride, and pride is in the word. It is in the
Yeah.
Bible. But they used it to really force you to not speak up about issues involved in the church. And they use a lot of fear tactics. If you thought about, bucking up against the system, all kind of things like that. I remember one service, there was this guy who had a death in his family. I think it was his brother or something like that. And it was on a Sunday service, and he went to his brother's funeral as he should. And I
Right.
remember the so-called leaders in the church did like this little meeting before the church service, and they were just kind of going over the agenda. And they were like, "Hey, where is this guy at? He was supposed to be here, and he's at his brother's funeral." And then one of them made the comment, "Well, that's you're supposed to let the dead bury the dead." And when I
Mm.
heard that, I was like, "Oh, that's another strike." Like, really, this guy's brother died, who's been here all his life. And where
Yeah.
is the compassion or empathy at for this guy for his brother dying? Didn't take him anything for his family, any cards, anything, but you make a little nasty comment like that, man. A lot of things like that just rub me the wrong way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's probably countless, examples like that
Mm,
of where just words are thrown around and, scripture is misused and,
yeah,
you know, uh, it's really just foolish and stupid and ignorant, you know.
yeah,
the things that have been said, especially like in that situation, right?
Mm,
Each person loses a loved one, and then it's kind of just it's just thrown around in a way that is just not sensitive to that person's
yeah.
time of need. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
Being there for them, showing them love, right?
Right.
Now they're just throwing out these words to try to make us feel guilty. And I think that's
Right.
one of the tactics, right? That's a true cult like example, is
Right.
trying to manipulate someone, make them feel guilty about something, throw like our sin in our face so that you can kind of almost be beat up, or like with the scripture. And that's one of the things that infuriates me as I look back, is just that tactic.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Another one of those fear
uh,
tactics that they used was the word persecution. You're going to be
mm,
persecuted like Jesus. So if your
yeah,
family, if your friends try to say anything or do anything to try to get you to wake up, that's a sign that you're in the right church, in the right place, because you're being persecuted like Jesus.
yeah,
And they harped on that and they harped on that. And to a young mind, that, that's, they'll believe that,
yeah,
and I remember, man, we lost, like, separated myself from a lot of family and especially a lot of friends. A
yeah,
lot of friends. I was young. I just had a kid. I was playing football at Santa Monica College. And when I got involved in this church, my whole life stopped.
yeah,
And they didn't really care about me being, a parent or anything like that. There was never no guidance initially, but you got to be here, you got to be there at this activity, that activity. Some of those activities are like at 9 and 10 o'clock at night. What I look like having a 1 year old,
right,
in a stroller at 9 and 10 o'clock at night. But
right,
the fear, the tactics that they did to control you,
yeah,
especially when they got you separated from your family and friends, man, that was devastating. I'm still hurt by that to this day, because
yeah,
some of those relationships, and you couldn't get back.
yeah, yeah,
You just couldn't get back. They were never the same because of the decision that we made.
yeah, man. I do have some deep feelings and regret.
Mm,
I'm in counseling right now. Like I said, I
yeah,
thought it was going to start off as marriage counseling, but it's going back to my
yeah,
childhood, and we talking about this church stuff. And, so this is like a real, painful, part of our lives.
yeah,
I think, I just want to pause on that, and I just want to say, first to you, as my best
yeah,
friend, I want to apologize to you because I feel guilty for, introducing you, to a lot of these shenanigans,
mm,
and, to your mom. She was there for me even when I was trying to
yeah,
figure out myself. So
yeah.
I just want to say, man, I'm sorry.
Hey,
And
it's all
also,
good, brother. It's all good. I mean, all that is forgiven and over. I never blamed you 1 minute. And one thing that
yeah,
helped me, and we'll talk about this later, was I never blamed nobody. I
yeah,
didn't blame you. I didn't blame society. I didn't even blame the church. I blamed myself,
yeah,
because I'm the one who made the decision. And
yeah,
that helped me sort of heal in the aftermath. And I know we'll talk about that later, but there was definitely a lot of trauma. And they were really hard on me about these households. It was like, he needs to be in a Christian household. And the thought was I couldn't rise up in their leadership because I didn't live in a Christian household.
yeah,
And I remember one particular day I was hanging out with one of these brothers who lived in a household. I went over his house, and he was really talking to me about it. And the house was just so disgusting. And I'm not,
yeah.
talking about people or nothing like that, man. There were so many roaches, man, coming out the
Mm.
cereal, coming out the couch.
You
Man,
say
you go over
roaches?
somebody's house like that. I mean, the roaches were like guests, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Like,
yeah,
I shook all my clothes out when I left. Man, I took
yeah.
off my socks, my shoes before I got in the car.
Man,
I was like,
disgusting.
hell no, not going to
Disgusting.
happen. And I
Yep,
didn't say that, but I just never did it. I was like, nah, I'll
yep,
stay right where I'm at. I don't
yep.
want no roaches in my son's diaper bag.
Man, bro. Man, I remember going to a household one time. I straight opened up the refrigerator door, and all the homies was running out the
Mm,
refrigerator. Straight roaches all over the place.
man.
Man, we had to move. Like I was like, man, I ain't living in this mess. But that like you said, but that's just that's just how foul things can be. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? You think you clean and getting spiritual and faking the funk and shaking and doing the dance, and your house is literally filthy. I mean, literally filthy. You coming from different backgrounds, just trying to pair
Right.
people up. So I mean, but I need to just rewind a little bit, because I know we know a lot of people. Some people maybe just be thinking we've been missing for a minute. But I do
Hmm.
want to apologize, just even with my influence in that church, for
Hmm.
all those that may see this video, to especially to my family and
Hmm.
to friends, because I know I isolated myself for years,
Yeah.
thinking I knew something. At that time, my heart was in a sense pure on what I was trying to pursue, but I lacked so much understanding on what
Right. Yeah.
exactly I was pursuing.
Right.
But like you said, Lane, I have to take responsibility, and part of this chat right now is kind of part of my healing too. So
Yeah.
for all those that are watching this, especially my family, friends that I just kind of kicked to the curb, I just want to say I am truly sorry. And if any of you hear this and just want to, chat and chop it up, please just send an email to the Spitting and Chatting Gmail
Yeah.
account. I would love to just connect and apologize to you straight face to face. But I just, for me personally, I just needed to get that out.
Yeah. I know I had a talk with my son because he was a little baby when I was in the church, and
Hmm.
that was the biggest hurt that I had.
Yeah.
I talked earlier about my family and my friends, but falling off on the responsibilities of my son. I mean, I was a new dad,
Yeah.
and man, I thank God that I had my mom and my grandmother to help me because he
Man.
would have been one of them houses with roaches or something.
Yeah. Yep.
Playing with
Yep.
roaches. But I talked to him and I talked to my family and the friends and just said, man, face to face, like, I'm sorry. This is
Yeah.
a terrible mistake. And I had to pick up the pieces to my life and not look
Yeah.
back at that place. And I disassociated myself from them. And I really got to really capture what having good friends and really family was there for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
My family was there for me. It was like, it's all good. You're here now. Forget about it.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm grateful to my mother and to my grandmother and my all my family because they didn't just close me off.
Yeah.
And they knew I was going through something and they saw what was going on. And the church even tried to pull them in and they were like, nah,
Yeah.
want no parts of that. But I
Right.
am so grateful that I have them and have friends like yourself that when I got out there was no judgment and no like pointing the finger and I told you so, just like, hey, it is what it is, let's move on.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I thank God for just our relationship, or our
Yeah.
friendship. I think the most painful part is there are a lot of people, like I still believe in God. I think there's a difference between people leaving church,
Yeah.
because that's just an organization, and leaving their true belief. But I mean, the unfortunate part, there are a lot of people that just have lost their whole belief,
Yeah.
in God. And that's kind of the most painful thing that I've witnessed. I've seen people leave their marriage, or just kind of literally go insane and completely turn into different people,
Right.
without the church. And when I was kind of, like I said, kind of preparing for this, I really started like getting emotional, because as I'm reading through this psychology stuff about cults, it listed like some of the aftermath like we experienced. And so just a few things I'm going to rattle off.
Yeah.
It says extreme identity confusion, panic and anxiety attack, depression,
Yep.
anger, guilt and shame, decision making dependency. Because remember, they was making decisions for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Fear and phobia, sleep disorders, eating disorders, fear of intimacy and commitment, distrust of self and others, grieving loss of friends and family. That's
Yeah.
where I feel like I'm at right now. Like you, I'm trying to pick up the parts and pieces to my life, and I'm knocking on 50. Like,
Yeah.
but imagine those that can't talk about this, or having like disorders, and it literally says PTSD, loss of life and meaning or purpose.
Yeah.
Those are like real issues that people, like you and me, have gone through, and thank God was able to kind of keep hold of each other and just
Right.
talking and have our family that didn't disown us, as we
Yeah.
did them at certain points. But man, it's a lot of people I'm sure that are hurting out there,
Yeah.
if they're not like talking through it, you know?
Yeah, that was one of the things I noticed. I talked to a few people who had left, and man, you could tell by the way they were talking and their expressions, they were so traumatized. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was for myself, it was fairly easy. And I want to bring up one thing. There was within this church, and I want to talk about this now, where there
Yeah.
was one person in this church outside of you who made a difference in my life. And I was looking at things like, man, this is not good. But at the same time, I'm trying to find myself as a young man. The church had me so busy, I really couldn't get myself in my career going or any
Mm.
sort of education. And
Yeah.
yeah, they talked about it, go to school, go, do all that. But your time was so restricted, you couldn't perform as a student.
Right.
It was hard. I
Right.
met a gentleman by the name of, and I'll say his name, by the
Yeah.
name of Dr. Balai.
Yeah.
And at this time, I needed somebody like, man, to kind of just mentor me and kind of give me some guidance. And man, it was divine intervention how I met this guy. He was in the church
Yeah.
and he kind of took me up under his wing and, molded me a lot. Never did he talk to me about church, about scriptures, about the Bible. All we did was talk about man stuff.
Mhm.
We talked about sports, we talked about women, we talked about our past.
Right.
And he brings this subject to me and says, hey, how would you like a job making such and such? And I was like, oh man, I'm right there. Give me the app.
Right.
And he said, no, you're going to be in healthcare. You're going to go to school. And the minute he told me that, I took off. And
Yeah.
once I got in school, I didn't, forget not go to my clinical courses or anything. I put that
Mhm.
church mess to the side and I left. So he passed away in the church. And man, that bothered me so much. It hurt me. But I really took that initiative when I was in school and I did it for him. Because if it wasn't for him, Zane, I would not be in the place where I am right now because that
Yeah.
guy helped change my life. And he gave me confidence that I didn't have at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I remember that, bro, and
Yeah.
I remember the difference he truly made in your life. I
Yeah.
didn't know him like you did. You can tell like he was really about that life. Like he was a
Yeah.
genuine,
Yes.
he was a genuine believer in God, but like you said, like he didn't like have to do all that talking. Like he was just
Mm-hmm.
living. He was just
Yeah.
living his life out, and just by him like extending that to you, like it changed like your pathway, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference again between somebody that is just talking the talk and just needs to go sit down somewhere versus somebody
Right.
that's really living it out. Somebody that's really living it out, like they don't have to do all that.
Right.
You're gonna see by their life, they're
Yeah.
literally living it, walking it out. And he was doing that. Like
Yeah.
he was a humble man. Like,
Yeah.
you didn't hear him like talking crazy to nobody. Like he always had this just smooth and humble demeanor,
Yeah.
So man, yeah, shout out to him and to his legacy, to his
Yeah.
family that may see this. He definitely like impacted me from a distance and you up
Yeah.
close and personal. So yeah.
Man, every time I go to work, every time, hey, I have a difficult night at work during the pandemic, I think about that man. Because I think about the stuff he would teach me and would talk to me about, and
Yep.
the position that he put me in. I was like, I won't, treat this as something less in my life. This is something very important, and I love what I do because I help people
Yeah.
as a healthcare provider. But
Yeah.
this guy gave me the confidence that I didn't have, man. And I was
Yeah.
lacking so much confidence that I couldn't complete or do anything. But I
Yeah.
was going to service every Sunday, every Tuesday.
Yeah.
But this guy helped really just change my life. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who were just hurt, and people that I would talk to afterwards. Man, I could just really see the trauma that they couldn't let go.
Yeah.
And a part of it was they were trying to get back their life they had before
Yeah.
they got into the church.
Yeah.
And there may be some instances where you can kind of get back into that, but for the most part, man, you can't. That time
Yeah.
is past. You got to
Yeah.
pick up the pieces. And
Yeah.
I would encourage people, I would encourage families who have children in this church to, when their loved ones get out of it, because at some point they will,
Yeah.
help them pick up the pieces and just be there for them.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I know we're getting ready to wrap up, but
Yep.
before we do that, in our next episode, we're probably gonna talk about more about like the exiting and
Yeah.
getting out and trying to really pick up the pieces even more. But yeah, one of the biggest things, like you mentioned, is just that identity piece,
Hmm.
and that's what they say. Like people that come out of cults, that's one of the symptoms they're gonna
Right.
have, and
Yeah.
that is a hard piece right there.
Yep.
Because I'm seeing people come out and then it's like they try to start some other mess right back up. And it's like, dude, did you not learn? Like, are you not, understanding that you need to
Right.
go somewhere and heal yourself? Like,
Yeah.
zip it, sit down. This ain't for
Go sit
you. You
down
need,
somewhere.
yeah, go sit down. You need to
Right.
figure out what happened to you, like why you made that choice. And that's
Right.
that's kind of where I'm at. Like, where was I at in that time in my life? Like, what type of hard times, trauma, what the voids in my life that I chose? Because like you said, I still have to take responsibility. I can't
Mhm.
I can't blame.
Yeah.
I literally, chose, some of these decisions. Of course, I was vulnerable, I was young, but that doesn't take away from the responsibility of these pastors and rabbis and bishops out there that's
Right.
taking advantage of people. But for us to heal, you still got to look at, okay, what decisions did I make? Why was I so vulnerable at that time that
Right.
I allowed myself to go down that road?
Yeah. And like we
So
said, there's so much information and so much stuff that we went through, and I call it stuff because it was just when I think back and I look back, like, man, what the heck was I doing?
right,
But
right,
I can't think like that because it's in the past. What happened happened,
right.
and it is what it is. And
Yeah.
we're going to talk about in the next episode because this had to be a two-part episode because it was just too much, too many issues that and things that we saw to talk about in one
Yeah.
show. So tune in for
Sure.
the next show, the next episode, and we're going to talk about how we got out of this organization and the lives
Yep.
afterwards. And some people that we know that we won't involve them too much, but how they couldn't pick up the pieces and ultimately what happened to their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. So stay tuned. Thank you so much.